Okay, so not Shiv. Oh,
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are glad to have you for the 3 C's of a 2020 network maintenance strategy. We've got quite a bit to cover today, so we're not going to waste any time. Really quick before we get started, again, this is the 3 C's of a 2020 network maintenance strategy. And before we jump in, I want to introduce to you Aaron Olgridge. He's our VP of Sales for North America here at PivIT Global. Aaron, you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for taking time out to hear from PivIT and to give us a chance to introduce ourselves. Hopefully you find today useful and walk away with something that you can bring to your day-to-day work.
For sure. And Erin, we're just so thrilled to have you. For those of you that are not familiar with Erin, like I said, she is our VP of Sales for North America. She's been doing this, forever. I feel like since you started walking, you've been slinging IT. She's literally the smartest person I know, and is the first call that I make whenever I have a question here internally. So we're again just thrilled to have Erin and her wealth of experience for today's webinar. So thank you so much, Erin. We'll look forward to talking to you here in a little bit.
Thanks, Hunter.
Absolutely. Quick things before we get started today. This is a Zoom webinar for those of you that haven't figured that out yet. Couple quick housekeeping things. Your audio settings are there in the bottom left corner of your screen. That's where you can change your speaker and things like that. Nobody's going to be talking today, or you guys won't. So no need to worry about the microphone. Also, if you feel the need to chat, we're not going to be using the chat feature today, but I will highlight it there. There's just a quick chat button. You can send notes to the panelists. You can send notes to the other attendees, really whoever you'd like to, so feel free there. But one thing we will be using today is this Q&A section right here. At certain points, largely at the end, pardon me, we're going to be having you submit questions if you have them for Aaron and I to kind of take and intercept. There is a chance we may not get to all of the questions. If we don't, somebody from our team will definitely be reaching out with you with an answer to your question if it's something we can't get to or maybe don't have the resources for today. So without further ado, I think we'll just jump right in. This is our quick agenda. We're going to go over a very, very brief primer to network maintenance, kind of the nuance to a couple of different ways that different companies do it. We'll talk about the 3 C's of maintenance strategy. That's what everybody came for. And so we're excited to get into that and kind of peel back the curtain of what we believe creates valuable maintenance strategies here in 2020. We're going to, there in the middle of that, we're going to have some value assessments and walk through how you can actually start to assess the value of your current network strategy, maintenance strategy rather, and then also as you start to create new network strategies, maintenance strategies, and add and change things for the future, how you can use those same assessments to make sure you're getting a good deal. And then, like I mentioned, we'll wrap up today with a quick question and answer with Aaron, which we're very, very excited about. Before we jump in, and I swear I will start after this, but I want to just say that today our only goal is that you leave this webinar with the info that you need to take maintenance and make it valuable, right? We want you to maximize the value of that coverage and really get the most out of your money. Now, I will be upfront. OneCall is one of our subsidiaries here at PivIT. We do provide third-party maintenance, so we'll absolutely take your business, but the goal of today is not necessarily to just push OneCall down your throat. The goal of today, like I said, is just to give you the information that you need. We will be discussing some of OneCall because I think it's a great value for a lot of our customers, but we're also going to get into some specific OEM offerings as well. So without further ado, we'll actually start with a quick poll. These are anonymous, so don't worry about anything being tied to you. But one thing that we want to hear from you guys is what currently is your, what strategy do you currently use for your network maintenance? We've got a couple of pre-filled options in there. If nothing really rings true for you, no worries, don't answer. But we would like to get your feedback there. We're going to kind of tailor as we go along to your poll responses. So we'd appreciate anything there. So let's just jump right into this. What is the difference between OEM maintenance and third-party maintenance? This is that primer that I was talking about. So just right next to each other, OEM maintenance, as you guys know, it's service agreements. They're sold by the original manufacturer of that network gear. And generally speaking, they're specific to the manufacturer of that gear. So an example of that, you can't put a Juniper switch on SmartNet. That just would be kind of backwards. So that is definitely true with OEM maintenance, not so much third-party maintenance, but we'll get to that here in a second. Another kind of nuanced thing about OEM maintenance that some people know, and it's pretty intuitive, but you maybe have never thought of, is that generally, because of end of sale, last day of support, end of life, those dates that come with the OEMs and from the OEMs, those generally impact the life cycle of that asset in terms of maintenance. So whenever something, it's in Cisco land, goes last day of support, you can no longer cover that with SmartNet. So generally, your OEM maintenance strategy will definitely affect your intended life cycle for a specific asset. And then while this is not totally true always, whenever you quote OEM maintenance through a VAR, which is generally the way it's done, you're going to be kind of predefined into 8x5 next business day service agreements. Which again, you can get a little more creative with that, but generally speaking, through a VAR, that's what they're pushed to sell and to push on to you. When it comes to third-party maintenance, it's largely the same. These service agreements, they're very much similar, but they're sold by a third party like PivIT or OneCall, and they're usually OEM agnostic. And all that means is that in the example I gave earlier, you could put a Juniper switch under OneCall, maybe not SmartNet, but you could put a Juniper switch and a Cisco switch under the same maintenance contract if you needed to. They're also really good for legacy and kind of, the older generation hardware, as well as some newer generation hardware in your stack. We're not limited as third-party maintainers to the life cycles of an OEM. So generally, if you've got some mission critical, legacy piece of gear in your stack, you can still continue to cover that much after the last day of sale for a Cisco device. And then, the last point there, often SLAs are a little more flexible, and they're kind of tailor-made to you with some OEMs. Specific to OneCall, we always kind of tailor-make SLAs to our customers. And the reason for that is because they're, third-party maintainers are not bound by the kind of same set of laws and physics, if you will, that OEMs set for themselves. So you can get a little more creative with third-party maintenance. We'll kind of talk about the differences when OEM maintenance is a good fit, when third-party maintenance is a good fit, and sometimes why it's a good idea to kind of use both. Without further ado, just a little bit of an example. This is a Cisco 3850 switch. We just, again, to kind of pull out the differences. While it's not always the same, these are some sample numbers that we've pulled from SmartNet and then our last year OneCall pricing for a next business day, again, 3850 switch in the US, a 12-month contract, just to give you kind of a picture of what you're looking at in terms of pricing. When it comes to OEM maintenance, there's a couple of things that you should watch out for, and not that they're bad, but just questions you should definitely consider and think, whenever you're going in to make that maintenance buy. The first is the age and the generation of asset. Like we kind of talked about, the age and generation are largely going to affect with OEM maintenance how and where and for how long you can cover that specific asset. On the same line, you need to think through the intended life cycle of that asset. So not what it's supposed to be, not what it was made to be, but how you intend to use that asset. So if we want to use the 3850 example, if you've got that switch, in your data center, and it's pretty mission critical, how long do you want to have that there? 5 years, 10 years, less than that? That's something really, really critical to think through when it comes to OEM maintenance for a number of reasons. If to mention one, it's because of that kind of life cycle, the end of sale, end of support. Those dates largely are going to affect how long you can cover that asset. Again, and I kind of alluded to this, something else you'll want to consider is the specific importance to your operation. So how mission critical is this particular asset? And if this goes down, moving on to the next point, what's the potential cost of downtime for this particular asset? As you're probably starting to get the picture, these questions are on an asset by asset basis, so it can get a little overwhelming, but they are important things to consider. few more that I'll mention is the install location and the engineering locality, which just means, do you have teams nearby? So when I ask these questions for OEM maintenance, you might start to see we're asking the same questions when it comes to third-party maintenance. So aren't those the same questions? You're absolutely right. They are absolutely the same questions. And we really like to take that approach to maintenance, whether we're buying OEM maintenance on somebody's behalf or we're selling one call. We like to ask these questions first, again, on an asset by asset basis for the entire IT estate, just to consider which approach is best. And we'll get into those 3 C's here in a little bit. But again, this is what we're looking for. Are these things end of sale, end of life, last day of support? Is there a potential for forced upgrade if we go OEM, or if we go third party? There's not going to be. Is the asset critical? Can I quantify the cost of that downtime? Which country is it in, and do I have teams nearby? Pretty straightforward, but these are very, very good starting points when you're starting to craft your maintenance strategy and as your renewals come up for 2020. So because this is on an asset by asset basis, it can be a ton, especially if you've got a large estate, but it's absolutely necessary. Obviously, at one call, we do a lot of this for you and with you. So it's a little less burdensome, and a lot of third-party maintainers, a lot of OEM maintainers will do that same thing, but it's absolutely necessary that you start with these questions. And again, if you ask that there's a simpler way, oh my goodness, we've got the 3 C's for creating a 2020 maintenance strategy. So without further ado, I'm actually going to have Aaron come back in and join us as we start to get into the 3 C's of third-party maintenance. The first one we're going to cover today is coverage, and we're going to talk about what exactly do you need to be looking for in terms of coverage. Where do you even start when it comes to TPM versus OEM maintenance, all of the above. And again, our whole goal here is to try to just give you a holistic evaluation framework for your network maintenance strategies. We're not trying to push product, but we're going to shamelessly tell you what we do. So without that, Aaron, thank you so much for joining us again. Let's get into coverage. How about it?
Sounds good.
Great. So for coverage, we're going to talk through 3 real points. The first is fit, next flexibility, and third is locale. So for fit, we are going to start here. And if Aaron, just before we start talking about this, when we're talking about fit, what are we looking for?
Yeah, no, thanks, Hunter. So as you start to consider the possibility of third-party maintenance, it's good to kind of take a step back and look at the benefits that you receive from any maintenance contract. So from an OEM maintenance contract, you receive hardware replacement warranty, technical support, and access to software updates. So when considering whether or not a device is a good fit to move over to third-party maintenance, it's really going to hinge on that third piece because you can get the same, if not better, hardware replacement warranty, the same, if not better, technical support from many independent contractors and groups out there. So really, what determines a good fit for third-party maintenance comes down to the software component. And we can talk a little bit more about that as we move on.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. And when it comes to third-party maintenance, what's kind of a good place to start in terms of fit? Generally, we start with a grade, correct?
Right. So here at PivIT, what we do is we work with you on your entire IT estate, and we go through and we grade the devices. Grade 1 being the best fit for third-party maintenance, and grade 3 something that we would recommend always keeping under OEM. And then grade 2 in the middle is where we like to have a conversation. Depending on where and how you're using that product, it might be a good fit for third-party maintenance, or it might be better left on OEM. So part of engaging with us is going through this consultative process where we help demystify and give you visibility into your estate as to exactly what's a good fit for third-party maintenance, why, and we do that through our grading system. So as you can see on the screen here, we'll talk through grade 1 first. So a grade 1 is, again, like I said, a perfect fit for third-party maintenance. And a lot of that has to do with that software component, which we talked about earlier. So a grade 1 device it might be something that's gone end of support from the manufacturer. So there's no longer even OEM maintenance available for that product. You need that hardware replacement, and you can only get it from an outside group. So that's where we can come in and continue to support that equipment and extend the life of it. Another grade 1 device might be something where the software updates are publicly available from the manufacturer. So take Cisco, for example, all Catalyst switching line, 4500 series and down. So all of your 2960 switches, 3850s, Cisco offers publicly available software updates. You don't need a SmartNet to access those. So by moving those over to a third-party maintenance strategy, you're going to dramatically lower your maintenance costs while not sacrificing on hardware replacement, technical support, and you'll still have the software. One more piece, Hunter, if you go back. Sure. Another grade 1 device is something that might be not software bearing. So in Cisco land, again, it might be take, for example, the ASR line, where Cisco will sell individual SmartNet contracts for all of the blades, when in fact it might just be that they're Ethernet or fiber blades. They don't hold any intelligence. It doesn't really make sense to pay a premium for SmartNet when Cisco's not developing software for that blade. So again, that would be a perfect fit for third-party maintenance. You can continue on, Hunter. So grade 2 is where we like to have a conversation. So it might be that it's a good fit for third-party maintenance. We just want to kind of hear more about how and where you're using these devices. These might be devices where the manufacturer has already started them on their milestone journey, with end of life being first and end of sale. And then as it moves through, one critical milestone is end of software maintenance. That's where we recommend companies really taking a look at those devices and moving those over to a third-party maintenance strategy. That's basically when the manufacturer has said that they're abandoning the platform. Most likely they've already replaced it. And so again, what you'll see with OEM maintenance is they're upticking the cost of support to try and kind of force your hand into upgrading those products, where if they're working, they're stable, you don't have any intention to update or change them. And in fact, it might be that you do intend to decommission them, but it might not be for, say, 2 or 3 more years. Those would be really good products to look at moving to a third-party maintenance strategy. And as mentioned there, these also might be products where they're stable in place, and that actually doing a software update could cause an outage or some downtime that you can't risk. You've standardized on a certain iOS or code revision, and the last thing that you would want to do is actually update the software. Again, that's where you can move those over to third-party maintenance and lower your operating expense on that estate. And then just speaking to, sorry, Hunter, real fast, it is worth mentioning that security vulnerabilities and bug patches are always publicly available. So you don't need to worry about that. If there is a device that is technically still being supported by the manufacturer, but it started to reach the end of its life and it's going through those milestone dates and it's in this gray area, please be assured that if there is a security vulnerability identified, the manufacturers make those bug patches publicly available, and PivIT can work with your team in ensuring that you get those code revisions from the manufacturer. Great, and so grade 3 is pretty straightforward. It's products that we recommend keeping under OEM maintenance. These are products that are probably, current generation. They might be heavily software and license intensive. So any of your firewall devices or any of your smart licensing in Cisco land components where you actually need a license key reissued from the manufacturer if your product fails. So simply having a hardware replacement on it isn't enough. You actually need the manufacturer to reissue the license key. These are situations where you're always going to want to keep those products under OEM maintenance until there might be a point at which either they're end of software maintenance or they're end of support, and then we can have a conversation if they move down to what we call a grade 2. But while they're in life, and if they're license key based, these are products that we would recommend keeping under OEM maintenance. And this is part of what we do is we educate you in the process, highlight these assets so that we can really take a look at what's a good fit for third-party maintenance and kind of focus in on that group of your estate.
Awesome. So just to recap, grade one, as we like to call it, it's a great fit for TPM. Often these have gone end of support, end of life, things like that. They're not software bearing. That grade two is kind of the in between, where again, if you worked with one call, we would kind of help you assess the risks, the pros and the cons to those grade two devices to make an informed decision on which strategy would be best moving forward. And then, as Aaron just got through mentioning, grade three is that best for OEM, that very reliant on software, that category. Aaron, thanks for flexibility. I want to focus on those two of the questions that we asked at the beginning of this. Around intended life cycle of that asset. So not necessarily the OEM's life cycle, but your intended life cycle for that asset, and then the specific importance to operations. Essentially, we're asking how long are we expecting this thing to perform its function, and then how critical is this function? Aaron, do you mind speaking to the questions at the bottom of the screen? You know, if you do have an asset that may become obsolete in the eyes of an OEM, and potentially one that's critically important to your network, you know, as a maintenance professional, what do you generally recommend that clients do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, you want to put obviously a roadmap together of what your refresh cycle is going to look like. That being said, the OEM is quick to end of life and end of support products. They want to keep you in this upgrade and refresh cycle. So it's important to not just look at what the OEM is dictating, but in fact look at your own business and how that product's functioning and running for you. If there's a technological reason, either innovation or perhaps remote configuration needs, things like that, then we would recommend looking at refreshing and upgrading your equipment. That being said, it's always good to have an independent and objective view of where that equipment's sitting in your network, how it's functioning for you, rather than following the OEM mandates. The OEM is going to obviously be looking out for themselves in their own pocketbook, and oftentimes they're going to be pushing a refresh that's not necessarily necessary or needed for you. So again, starting with looking at a technological reason, if there is one, then planning that roadmap out. And having a strategy for where that equipment is in its life. And if the plan is to decommission it, how are you going to support that equipment through that process? And does it make sense to continue to support it through the OEM if the plan is to phase it out and decommission it out eventually? So that's where PivIT can come in and support that equipment in the interim, and then also create a plan for how that equipment's decommissioned, how that asset recovery is handled, and then whether or not you choose to use that equipment and repurpose it in your network, and maybe set up a self-sparing strategy. But this is where PivIT can really come in and create a tailored solution for you, not something that's just out of the box.
Totally, and you started to get to it, but this is where, as you're starting to think through creating a maintenance strategy, this is obviously where you start to think of, okay, now I'm starting to, uncover these questions, turn over these leaves. Now, when it comes to actually covering it, is there an SLA from either the OEM or the third-party maintainer that actually reflects my needs? And in terms of those needs, what is the availability in terms of next hour for a business day on site, as you mentioned? What do the sparing models look like behind those SLAs? And then you've got to kind of ask yourself, do you need what is out there? Do you need something more, less? And obviously we'll get into, actually crafting that strategy, but I think these are, natural questions that start to come up at this phase of the process. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, that's exactly it, Hunter. You nailed it.
Awesome. And for enterprise clients, like you've got quite a few of, locale is massively important, right? We might have a data center or many data centers here in the States, and then data centers, across the globe with little to no teams right there beside it. So, again, the next kind of set of questions that naturally comes up is, where is this asset? And then where are my engineers? And then obviously, where is this maintainer, be it an OEM or a third party, where are they, located? And for one call, obviously we've got a pretty built out sparing network across the globe. But do you have any, wisdom to give people who are maybe new to third-party maintenance? Maybe they've always done OEM maintenance. When it comes to evaluating a sparing network and kind of the network of SLs around the globe, what's important for people to start looking for?
Yeah, so this slide really, two things pop out at me when I look at it. So one is obviously our topology of FSLs, which are our forward stocking locations that house our spares for both 4-hour and next business day coverage in all of those regions, as you can see. But furthermore, they also kind of are a hub for our Smart Hands offering, which are kind of two different things. They can be bundled into one, and we can sell both on-site field engineering service with either 4-hour or next business day hardware replacement. But we can also just offer a Smart Hands, hands and feet call out offering as well. And where this gets interesting, and I see this happening with a lot of my clients across the board, is with cloud initiatives. They're seeing their staffing and IT footprints shrink. And so oftentimes they've got branch and remote offices, but without any engineering support. So this is where PivIT, through our Extend offering, can come in and offer either an SLA-based field engineering response, 4-hour or next business day, as well as just ad hoc T&M project-based work. So whether it's extending a cable or just doing a simple hardware swap, as I mentioned earlier, asset recovery. So again, it's really important for us to sit down and take a look at all of your locations and put together a maintenance strategy that covers you both from a hardware replacement perspective, but then also from a field engineering perspective as well.
And if you'd like more information on our field engineering network, again, this is not the point of the webinar, but extend.pivotglobal.com is a great first place to start to kind of get a feel for both our field engineering offerings, as well as our other professional services such as decommissions, asset recoveries, things like you've already mentioned, Aaron. Again, extend.pivotglobal.com is where you could go for more information on that. Aaron, thanks so much for helping us cover that first C, being coverage. We're going to get into the next C now, which is cost. And this is where we talk primarily about value. We're going to go through 3 kind of quick calculations to help you both assess your current IT maintenance strategy, as well as any future initiatives that you may have planned. Before we do that, though, I'd like to move to our next poll. Currently, how are you measuring the value of your network maintenance strategy? Again, there's predefined answers in there. If you don't have a way that you manage those or measure that, pardon me, that's great. But there is a couple of questions for you in there. So if you have a second, please take a quick second to give your answer. While you do that, we'll go ahead and start into cost. The first thing that we're going to look at is the asset lifecycle versus the support cost of that asset. The second, we're going to look at the actual cost of support tickets. This is something our very own Gannon Boyd on our team here at PivIT presented for PTC and PETA back in January in Honolulu. So mucho thanks to Gannon for this portion. And then also we're going to look at the potential cost of downtime, something we've all heard a million different spiels on, I'm sure. We'll very briefly cover it today, just to make sure we get a holistic picture. So let's look for asset lifecycle versus support costs. Let's look at a real client example. Again, we've got a Cisco 3850. The install site was in the Pacific Islands, and this is from 2019. For that customer, they were able to secure that hardware at about $7,700. We've made numbers a little easier for the webinar today, so give or take a couple of cents. But the cost of the switch itself, $7,700. And as we started to work with this customer on their support strategy, we got a quote back from SmartNet, and we were looking at about $1,870 per year for that asset. This was a 4-hour SLA, again, under SmartNet, over a term of 5 years. And while it seems very, very intuitive, as you can see here, the support cost actually outweighs the hardware cost. So at that point, you've got to ask yourself, why wouldn't I just buy 2 and stick this in a closet somewhere until I need it? That's a very real question. That's, once people start to kind of see this, It almost makes too much sense, but there's got to be a better way. Now, with this customer, we ended up actually changing that SmartNet SLA for a one-call SLA at about $650 a year for the asset, bringing that support cost to $3250. Obviously, about half the price, or a little less than that, of that actual piece of equipment. Just for a holistic picture, what we also did is we took everything in that network, anything that was current generation, we stuck on NBD OEM support. We did that primarily for the software component that Aaron was speaking to earlier. For anything that was kind of mission critical, the single points of failure, we did strategic on-site spares for that. And then basically everything else we wrapped into kind of a nice bundle for a 4-hour one-call SLA. We had a couple field stocking locations around the install sites. And so everything turned out pretty nicely. We saved them, I think it was like 70%. Pretty crazy stuff. Again, I'd love to point you to Gannon Boyd's PETA presentation for more on that example, which you can find online. The next thing that we'll look to is the actual cost of support tickets. This is also shamelessly pulled from our very own Gannon Boyd. But when you start to look at costs like this, right, $93.50 for 5 years of support for a single switch, when you start to kind of zoom out and then consider your entire IT estate, you're spending a lot of money on support. So what we're going to look at here is we're just going to consider a 12-month term, and we're going to ask 3 questions. How many tickets were opened because of hardware issues? How many tickets for software issues? And then did we actually get what we were paying for in terms of software upgrades and updates from the OEM? Now, for this example, our customer in the Pacific Islands had 3 hardware tickets. They had 9 software tickets, and there actually wasn't any significant upgrades during this period of time that we're actually talking about today. That also makes it easy for the webinar. So we'll consider 12 tickets over 12 months. And for this example, the total support cost for this build was actually about $250,000, $250,000. So if you take that and just very simple math divided by 12 tickets, you can see that cost of those tickets was about $21K. And again, you've got to kind of ask yourself, is that cost actually equivalent to the value that I'm receiving from that support ticket? Maybe not. Now, obviously, this is very simple math. There is a little more kind of involved way to go about this to weigh hardware tickets versus software tickets. Again, either way, it's pretty bad. The range is about 17 to 24K per ticket. So we'll just make it easy for everybody, call it 21. But again, you can see support tickets get really, really expensive. And obviously you're not writing a check every time you open a ticket. But if you take a step back and do some reflection on your current maintenance strategy, I mean, do this simple calculation, right? And keep the numbers simple like we did here. Look at what those support tickets are costing you and see if that value is being provided from your maintainer. I think you might be a little bit surprised of what you might find. And then, like I said, we're not going to spend too much time on the potential cost of downtime. There's so much research out there. There's so much opinion out there. And obviously, it's really hard to quantify broadly, as I put there on the screen. It's very dependent on your operation, kind of how you've built up your network, how you've got things configured and set in your stack, if you're running redundancy, all of the things considered. It's a very messy topic, but it's a very, very important topic. Gartner averages that $5,600 a minute on average are lost during downtime, which is about $300K an hour. That kind of makes that support bill that we just looked at from our client look like nothing. So a quick calculation for the hourly cost of downtime is just change in revenue, change in productivity, recovery cost, and then the intangible cost. If you'd like more on that, you can check out pivotglobal.com/downtime. We've got some calculators on there for you. And that page will be going live after this webinar. But yeah, I mean, downtime is very, very obviously critical. Nobody wants downtime in their networks. And so considering the potential cost of downtime and as well as, the asset lifecycle, and that support cost, the actual cost of those tickets, and then the potential downtime. As you start to kind of square all of those numbers together, things either are going to make sense really quickly or not make too much sense really quickly. If they don't make too much sense, maybe it's time to reevaluate. So with that said, Aaron, I'll include you back. If you have any thoughts on that cost element before we jump into clarity, please feel free. But I think, Aaron, you might agree with me. The cost element is incredibly important to consider when you're, talking about covering your most mission critical assets, as well as kind of the things that you may forget about in your network.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And again, I would just point back to what I had mentioned earlier, which the OEM is notorious for upticking the cost of support on aging devices. And part of the reason that they say and justify that is that they think that there's going to be an increase in failures and that the parts are more scarce. Both things are actually not true, especially in Cisco land. Networking equipment is built to last. It has a long time between failures, the mean time between failures. I would say for some of the edge switching line, it's up to 15 to 20 years. Typically with a failure, what you're going to see is a power supply or a fan. So again, the OEM upticking the cost of support on those aging devices doesn't always make sense. And it's important to either push back on them regarding that or look at a third-party maintenance company when you feel that push is happening from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're working with your clients on this cost element, obviously cost is, cash is king, cost is everything, right? But when it comes to translating cost into value, any wisdom there in terms of looking at maybe a legacy network maintenance strategy that a customer has? How do you kind of help them drill into that value part? And then, if appropriate, how do you, kind of introduce them into an alternative such as one call?
Right. I mean, it really is having the conversation with them, working through the grading system and going through a pricing exercise where we literally go side by side. This is what the cost of OEM support looks like. This is what the cost is for third-party maintenance. And you can usually see that it's dramatically lower. And then they can start to move through those grades, right? What will it look like if we just do our grade 1 items through third-party maintenance? What if we pull in a little bit more from our grade 2 and take a look at how that lowers the overall operating expense? Also what happens is you can push off refresh cycles. So where the OEM is going to force your hand in upgrading out of a product, you can delay that capital expenditure by continuing to support that legacy infrastructure through one call indefinitely, right? So again, taking control of those refresh cycles, not having them be dictated by the manufacturer, and really looking at where and how you're using those devices and trying to eke out as much life as you can out of those assets.
Definitely. And you started to allude to this on the value part. And I think it's kind of the greatest intro into our next section, which is the third and final C, clarity. What we say there is what you see should be what you get, right? It's very simple. We believe that here at PivIT and at One Call, absolutely. But you started to mention going through a cost exercise in terms of the grade. That in terms of clarity, this third C we'll call fit. But when it comes to actually looking at your, IT estate, and let's say it's in a spreadsheet or one hub, if you're advanced and have moved over, ditch the bulleted spreadsheet. But whenever it comes to actually looking at that IT estate, and let's say you start to grade your assets, what does it look like, crafting a strategy from that point?
Yeah, so usually it kind of is a bit self-evident, right? So depending on your network topology, if you have, a large legacy estate where a lot of it's going to be a grade 1, what we also do is go through and give you those OEM milestone dates for all of your devices so that you can see where that product is in its life. And then you can also project out that if, say, a product's going to be going end of software maintenance or it's going to be going end of support during your OEM maintenance term, we can work with your OEM bar and ensure that there's a smooth transition over to TPM. But usually the first step, like we've said, is going through and really looking at your estate on a granular level. Oftentimes, beyond just the grading, there's also sometimes we uncover other things that are noteworthy, like you might have a high density of a certain device in one location, where rather than even putting it on third-party maintenance support, it might make more sense to do a self-sparing strategy or have a sparing strategy that we manage for you. So we can kind of look at both your topology, your density, and then the grading to kind of come up with a blended hybrid approach that's going to best meet all your needs.
Totally. You started to allude to it, but the next point under this clarity is scoping and bin sparing. And we started to hit on this under coverage. But it's really, really important, I think, and I, obviously I learned everything I know from you. So I think you would agree that it's really important to first define your need, right? Figure out exactly what you need, where you need it, and then go shopping for an SLA or work with, a company like OneCall or another maintainer to create one. Because if you do it the other way around, it's kind of like squaring a circle, right? It's how do you rework your network to meet this SLA, which is totally backwards. That's not why we do this. That's not why we have maintenance on our assets, right? We need to define our needs first, and then, like you mentioned, starting with density, defining those single points of failure. That is really, really critical to figuring out in terms of an SLA what you even need.
Right, and there might be gaps that you aren't even quite aware that you have just because you've been band-aiding your way through. And so it is important to take a step back and just get a little bit of an objective outside view into your network and giving ideas that you may not have thought of before. Like for instance, if you are decommissioning equipment, yet you still have those same devices supported in other parts of your network, say you're going through a Cisco router upgrade and you're phasing through that. And as you're doing that, you're decommissioning the same routers that in a year or two you're going to be upgrading. Well, why not use those decommissioned assets for a self-sparing strategy, and we can help manage that with you. And then again, dropping down your overall operating expense and then also uncovering value where you didn't really know that you had it there before.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you, Erin. The last point to this clarity part is a word that I've used a lot here today, but SLA, right? The service level agreement, the actual nitty gritty of what you're getting in terms of coverage. And again, we believe that what you see is what you should get. And so in terms of an SLA, whenever you're shopping around for SLAs, again, be it from OneCall, directly from an OEM, from another maintainer, doesn't matter. At the very beginning, it's really, really important to define what is that SLA? And within that SLA, is the SLA for a response or for a resolution? I think that, I know that we've helped customers who have gotten in kind of a pickle because of that, that definition being kind of ambiguous, right? You want to know, am I going to just start to hear from somebody in 4 hours, or am I going to actually, be back up? My network's, no longer degraded within that given time frame. That's incredibly important to define up front. Also, what is considered resolution, right? Is it the dispatching of a spare, or is it actually the delivery of that spare? Again, these really kind of hairy, intricate details of your SLA can either really make your day or really, really bite you in the butt. So a couple of things that we like to make sure that our customers are asking us, and also we like to go ahead and define at the onset, but whenever we know that customers are shopping around, we want to make sure that they're asking where are the actual spares kept, how are they delivered, is there engineering available for that delivery, and then at what point during that escalation can I expect to learn about the gear that's coming to me? Is it configured? Is it ready to go? Or am I going to have to sit there and really, really work to get that thing ready to be installed into my network? Erin, around these questions, and again, I shamelessly steal from you all the time, most of the slide deck. Talk to us about, really getting into the nitty gritty of that SLA, getting down to this, the spare, the asset level spare, that granular detail. what are some other things, or maybe more on these notes that people should be looking out for?
Yeah, so from PivIT, we have some unique SLA offerings where we can, like I said, really customize the solution for you. So we can do, next business day hardware replacement, 4-hour, but then we also have an on-site spare option. So again, as I mentioned, for some of those highly more products that have a higher failure rate, whether it's a fan or a power supply, it might be that you would prefer to just have some on-site spares handy right there at your location, which is absolutely something that we can do. So depending on your density and your needs, we can really craft SLAs to be specific to meet any gaps that you might have while ensuring that you're not overpaying or being overcharged for services that you don't. And then again, that the field services piece of it is something that rather than tacking on field services as an adder onto each device, if you do need on-site support, we can treat that as a separate engagement that you can use in a more flexible and customizable approach, whether it's project-based or, like I said, call-outs for deinstall and install. So not to overcomplicate it, it really isn't, but it is just about sitting down with you, looking at your estate, your locations, and what your needs are, and crafting specific solutions to meet those gaps and those needs. And then as far as I'll just speak to the SLAs and in terms of response and resolution. And it's one thing that I know PivIT we're incredibly proud of is that we get back to you within the first half hour with a technician from the moment that you open a support ticket with us. If the issue is very straightforward and you have a dead power supply or a dead fan, we're not going to make you jump through a million hoops and try and delay or push off that ticket time, which we see from both the OEM and from other third-party maintenance companies, where they'll use it as a little bit of a delay tactic while they're either getting their ducks in a row, getting a more expertise engineer on the line, or perhaps they don't actually have the spare sitting at the local depot, and again, they need to buy themselves a little bit of time. At PivIT, we 100% spare. It's part of the onboarding process. We work with you in ensuring that we have component level detail, that we have spares sitting at that 4-hour or next business day depot, and we will give you the amount of technical support that you're requiring, but not ever push that on you if you just in fact need a replacement issued right away. And the engineer that does respond to your call and is answering that one call ticket has the ability to issue the RMA and get that process moving. So please rest assured that if you've ever had any pain in the past with opening a ticket with a large bureaucratic, clunky OEM or a third-party maintenance company that didn't in fact have the parts spared, that's not going to be your experience here at PivIT. And we've got a strong fix-it-first policy. We'll make sure you're taken care of.
Definitely. And before we move on and kind of get into the question and answer, I think a couple of points that are just worth hitting home here is that, and you started to allude to this, but when you open that one call ticket, there's not an intermediary with one call, right? With the person who responds to your ticket is going to be a Cisco certified engineer, assuming it's for a Cisco device, right? They are going to be at least more local than some call center, right? We've got contact centers in the Philippines, all across Europe, in Pakistan. Really, we obviously here in the US, we have, we run the gamut in terms of where we've got engineers, where we have teams, both for technical support, virtually, or for that on-site, help that you may or may not need, as you were mentioning, Aaron. The other thing that I think is really important and worth hitting home is that in terms of sparing, right? This often comes as a surprise to people, but a dirty little secret of some third-party maintainers is that they might sell you the spare, but they may not have it. So being able to ask and receive that information at the onset of your coverage, what is this spare, right? Is it to my specifications, so that when it arrives, hopefully it doesn't have to, but when it arrives at your location, it's ready to go. That's something that, I mentioned OneHub earlier. That's our kind of portal, as people like to call it. But it is our single pane of glass where not only can you manage your entire IT estate, whether or not it's covered by PivIT or One Call. You can put SmartNet in there. You can put NetSure, whatever you want to put in there. You can put all your maintenance contracts in there. You can, then you can go in and manage all of those assets. But for your One Call assets, you can see the serial number of the spare, the address of that spare, and as soon as it's dispatched, you can see where it is on a map and exactly when you can expect it. And while that may seem, gimmicky at the onset, I think it's really, really important to make sure that, people know that there's a better way to do maintenance, right? There is a better way that gives you the information that you want. Maybe you don't need it, but you want it, right? You should have that information. And that's exactly what, One Call strives to do, to your point, Erin.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we actually call that piece of it our sparing integrity program. It's something we take very seriously here at PivIT. And just giving that full transparency, not only from a sparing perspective, but then also the grading, making sure that we're not covering a device that is not a good fit for third-party maintenance, and educating you through the process up front. We always want to be fully transparent and make sure that we're building trust through this process.
Absolutely. And for more on that, it's, onecall.pivotglobal.com/coverage. You can find everything you'd ever need to know about not only where we are, but exactly what services we provide around the country and around the globe to our One Call customers. At the end of it, when it's all said and done, what we want you to do is do IT better. We don't want you to do IT alone. We think that, while it's, kind of funny to call it the 3 C's, truly, if you evaluate your network strategy, your network maintenance strategy, and you look at these things through this lens, as you can see, it all kind of fits together. Locale is kind of sprinkled across all 3 of the C's, as are SLAs. So all of these things are intertwined, but truly, before you start shopping for SLAs, if you consider your network maintenance strategy through this lens, I don't see a world where you don't make a really, really great and well-informed choice for your renewals coming up here this summer. Yeah. Cool. So, Erin, you have agreed to stick around with us. We've got a couple minutes left today. So what we'd like to do is open up the floor to you guys who are here watching with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you need to run, no worries at all, but we do have a little time left and reserved for question and answer with Erin. So give us like 10 seconds to start to get some questions in, and our team will start feeding those to us. Erin, I've got a first one from Ian N. He is in Michigan, and Ian wants to know, when I'm evaluating NBD or 4-hour, what are the things that I should look for networking devices?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one area that we really have you focus on is where you have redundancy. So where you might have, say, in a chassis, redundant supervisors or redundant power supplies, that would be a good fit for next business day. There's no sense in overpaying either OEM maintenance or a small uptick with TPM for a 4-hour when you're already running something in a redundant pair. If there's a single point of failure, like say for the chassis itself, that if it goes down, you actually need another chassis on site, then that's where we recommend 4-hour. It's also important to look at location. If you have something in an international location, say down in South America or in APAC, oftentimes the OEM will sell you a 4-hour contract, but they're not going to deliver in 4 hours, and it will be, in fact, next business day. So we also kind of help guide and consult on the OEM side as well. And if we see something and going through your estate where we would recommend moving it from 4-hour to next business day, we can work with you in that. But essentially, those are kind of the 2 points. One, if it's something that's redundant or if there's a single point of failure, and then 2, if it's an international site.
Awesome. Our next one comes from, our next one is from Ned A, is his first initial of his last name, rather. Ned would like to know, when it comes to telephony and optics / accessories, is there a reason to spare those?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's always important to have some spares, especially of optics on hand. And that is also something that we can assist you with. We do cover components in our maintenance program, but on top of that, we do offer just ad hoc hardware sales is a large piece of what we do here at PivIT. So we've got, you know, every imaginable fiber cable, optic in stock, immediately available. We back everything with a lifetime warranty. We have both OEM labeled as well as our own PivIT branded. So that's absolutely something that we can take a look at and make sure that you're well stocked and have a couple of fiber optic modules and certainly fiber cables at your locations to make sure you're covered.
Awesome. And Aaron, while our team, they're feeding me a couple of more questions, but while they do that, I actually have a question for you. Something that we've talked kind of extensively about is how unique it is. And again, not trying to just, you know, push one call, but it is incredibly unique in this space that PivIT is both a hardware VAR as well as a third-party maintainer. Do you mind kind of speaking to the why that's unique and why that's important and potentially valuable to customers?
Yes, absolutely. So kind of going back and talking about our asset recovery offering, what we're seeing from a lot of clients are pretty aggressive cloud strategies. And in doing that, they're decommissioning a lot of equipment. And again, as legacy equipment is coming off and being upgraded, equipment's rolling out of our clients' network. So what we come in and do is purchase that equipment back. And we can either give trade-in credit or cash. Oftentimes, they might need some on-site professional services or logistics support that can offset the cost. But really what happens there is through our asset recovery arm, it feeds back into our hardware offering. And we also, on top of the hardware that we get from our asset recovery, we also have some unique arms into the Cisco Excess channel and HP Renew and Dell Overstock. And the reason that I bring that in is that the importance of that is that our engineers that are answering our one-call line have experience in our distribution center and our testing line. So because we're selling the hardware and also handling asset recovery and cleansing and doing data sanitization of equipment that's coming out of network, that gives PivIT, you know, experience that no other third-party maintenance company has with having our hands on the equipment. So it's physically coming through our channels, through our distribution center. We're testing it. Our engineers have the real-world experience of working with that equipment, and then that feeds out into our 4-hour depots globally. So again, what that also gives you is the ability for us to pre-configure and stage equipment on your behalf. Which is no other third-party maintenance company is doing that, and it's really what sets us apart.
Awesome. Well, with that, we do have a couple more questions about ticketing, which I'll say onecall.pivotglobal.com has everything you need to know about tickets. You can also check out our help center, which is easily found in the navigation. But with that, we're pretty much at time. So I want to say thank you, Aaron, so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. If you have further questions, please feel free to reach out, whether that's through forum or email or whatever way works for you. Phone calls work. And then additionally, for those of you that are attendees, we'll be sending out a recording so that you can watch, share with your internal teams, do whatever you want to do with that. So again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We hope that you've taken what we've said and hopefully feel armed to go and make a really just valuable, incredible maintenance strategy for your renewals that are coming up this year. And then lastly, if Aaron or anybody else on our team can help you and assist you in creating your own network maintenance strategy, again, onecall.pivotglobal.com. There's a quick form to get in touch. Fill that out. Let us know what you think and how we can help. We'd be glad to. Obviously, there's no cost to you just for having a conversation. So feel free, reach out. And again, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your week.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.